Greetings and welcome once again to LegalizeFreedom.com. I'm Greg Moffat and my guest today is Keith Farnish, activist and author of Time's Up, an Uncivilized Solution to a Global Crisis. In the third instalment of our mini-series investigating the inevitable collapse of industrial civilization, Keith discusses some of the key issues raised in his book and just where our advanced but dangerously interdependent and precariously balanced global society is headed. Hello and welcome, Keith Farnish, and thank you very much for joining us today on LegalizeFreedom.com.
Hi there, good to talk to you.
Now, Keith, today we're going to talk mainly about some of the information and points which you cover in your book Time's Up, an Uncivilized Solution to a Global Crisis. And if people are thinking, oh, what global crisis are you talking about? Well, I don't know where they've been living, but before we dive into that, perhaps you could just tell us something about your personal background and the journey that you've been on from, fairly conventional work life, conventional guy, through to where you are now with your writing and your activism, just how you've gone from that one place to another.
Yeah, sure. It is a fairly conventional background. We were never particularly poor. We were never particularly rich. When I was younger, we had a hotel in Margate on the Kent coast, and they were lovely days, to be honest. I used to spend a lot of my time down there on the coast and just cycling around. In a way, that's something I've sort of throughout my life tried to recapture that idyll, that sort of childhood carelessness, where really that's something you don't want to worry about, things that adults worry about, and it turns out I end up worrying about all the things that hardly anyone worries about, which is ironic, really. But the rest of my time up to when I discovered activism, again, was fairly conventional. Went to university, got a geography degree, started work in computing because it happened to be something I was good at. And probably about 2000, I was starting to get itchy feet with regards to the state of the natural world. I'd always had an awareness to a certain extent, but it was I sort of wanted to do something. Got in touch with a local Greenpeace group. Thought I was being really radical by sort of standing on corners and shouting and being sworn at, and having hoses sprayed at me and generally being pushed around. But it's actually stood me in quite good stead, because you work out the thick skin, and you start to realize that what people say is out of a lack of understanding rather than genuine hatred of what you're doing. But it was only in, I suppose, 2006, 2007 was when I really started to realize that even the activism, which I now put in quotes, that I was doing was very much mainstream, introduced to the works of Derek Jensen by a good friend of mine who was on a road protest camp in Southend-on-Sea, and also realized that almost all of the writing that was being done at the time, and also most of the activism that was being carried out at the time, was fruitless and not achieving anything like where we should be going. So I thought, well, I mean, I'm a fairly bright guy. I can try and work things out. And I suddenly realized I'd sort of got it in about 2007. And I realized I had to put this down onto paper, left my job, and started work on the book, the first book. And that during that period of writing, that's when all of the ideas about connection and the 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 sheer goodness of actually bringing down the industrial system, which is something that most people consider to, so most civilized people consider to be abhorrent. It all eventually became a completely logical thing. So where I am now is, well, I know that very soon, certainly in the time of the human span, industrial civilization will be gone. It's how it's gone, I think, that is significant now.
Yeah, well, I mean, industrial civilization is the global crisis, basically, that you refer to in the sort of the subtitle of the book. And, anyone who has got any sense to look around them and see what's happening understands that industrial civilization is in crisis. But the people, for example, you spoke about who would have, heckled you and abused you when you were on green protests, as you said, it was more of a lack of understanding where they were coming from than actual an active hatred of you or what you stood for. And part of it is this unwillingness, this deep psychological unwillingness to really face the situation that we're in and the problems that we're lining up for ourselves, the problems that we're actually living through now, and where that's going to take us. And basically, people can't conceive of industrial civilization that most of us in the West have enjoyed for so many generations. They can't conceive of that going away. However, it's in crisis. It is going away, and in the book, you not only address this, but you say we would be better off if we actually took this thing apart now, if we prepared for its end and started to take it down now, than wait for it to fall apart. And the ramifications of that would be so much worse, rather than if we just act positively now.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I tend to make assumptions, and you have to make assumptions. It's like if you walk up to someone in the street and you start talking to them, you assume that they can understand what you're about to say, just on a purely linguistic basis. And if they start speaking another language, then it sort of takes you back for a bit until you adjust to that. There's a couple of assumptions I make. Certainly in Time's Up, I make the assumption that people do accept that anthropogenic global warming is a scientific fact, and it's something that is fundamentally changing what we're doing, which fundamentally changing what's the state of the Earth's ecology. I move forward in that with the new book, which is the assumption that industrial civilization has to go, and that's a huge assumption, and it's self-defeating in a way, because my market rapidly shrinks in terms of readership. I've never sought to make any money out of these books, but just as an aside, they've always been released under a Creative Commons license, so anyone can read them and use them and abuse them in whatever way they like, as long as they don't try and make money out of them. So financially, there's nothing in it for me. But I would like to use the market with a small m to try and get this across to as many people as possible who are at least in a position of being ready to make a change, whether that's a personal change, whether it's a change in their community, whether that's a change in the way they affect other people and the wider industrial systems in general. It's a really difficult balancing act, and I've decided, sod it. I'm not going to try and balance. I'm going to say, this is what I mean, this is what I feel, and we've just got to face this is going down, and which